In this story, I'm going to tell you how I saved my little Portland coffee shop from an assistant who was stealing cash, filing fake health complaints, and trying to get me evicted, and how I got a revenge that was fair, clever, and quietly satisfying. But I didn't blow up or public shame her. I posted one innocent-seeming thank you to the shop, had time-stamped receipts and hidden tip jar footage ready, invited the landlord and inspector, and let the truth do the humbling. Stay with me, I'll show you the exact post, the evidence, and the moment everything flipped. My name is Evelyn Hart, I am 34 and I live in Portland, Oregon. I run a small neighborhood coffee shop on a busy block near the river, and I have spent the last 7 years building a life that feels like mine. I love the rhythm of the place, the hiss of espresso machines, the way regulars slide into the same seats, the rotating art on the walls. I am steady, careful, and proud of what I have built with long hours and stubbornness. I did not expect drama. Then my assistant of 2 years, Mara, began to change. She was brilliant at taking orders and juggling mornings, but over time she started showing up late, making excuses and talking down to customers. At first I chalked it up to stress. Then I noticed money missing from the tip jar and petty lies about deliveries. I confronted her gently, hoping we could fix things. Her face hardened and she told me I was overreacting, that I was too controlling, and that I should be grateful she even worked for me. After that she began undermining me in small ways that grew worse. She would tell people the shop was closing early when it was not, she would deny that customers had requests or orders, and she left a roast bag mislabeled that cost us a customer contract. The final twist came when I discovered an online review from her under a fake name that accused my shop of unsanitary conditions and worse, and it had appeared hours before a health inspector visit. The inspector called me that morning to warn me someone had complained. I felt sick and helpless. Mara had become my nemesis. She was quietly trying to sabotage everything I had built. I needed to stop her to protect the shop and the people who counted on me. I wanted a way to respond that would be fair, clever, and something I would not be ashamed to tell friends about later. I wanted my revenge to be proportional, not cruel, and to have a touch of humor so it would feel like a lesson rather than a crushing blow. I replayed small memories to find when the shift began. Mara laughing too loudly at a rude customer's joke, the day she insisted the dishwasher was fine when it left a smear on a plate, the afternoon she accidentally swapped the espresso beans labeled for decaf with the regular roast, sending a caffeine-addicted regular into a jittery spiral. Her charm had always been a mask, bright, disarming, quick to apologize when it suited her. But underneath it was a streak of entitlement that liked being the center of attention. Outside the shop my life was slow and content, friends who texted memes, a small apartment full of plants, Sunday hikes along the Willamette. The shop was my lineage, the place where my name mattered. Watching someone pick at its seams felt like watching a map I'd drawn be redrawn by someone else. I promised myself rules, no illegalities, no humiliation that would ruin a life, and always a thread of humor so the story could be told without bitterness. I began keeping notes on scraps of receipt paper and in a neat, passworded folder on my laptop. Each incident got a line, date, time, what happened, witnesses. It felt oddly calming to document instead of stew. I also started small defensive moves, moving the tip jar behind the counter for a time, labeling the storage more clearly, and double-checking delivery boxes. The shift in my posture surprised even me. Where I had once allowed messiness for the sake of kindness, I now smiled and asked direct questions. Mara noticed and she reacted. Her lies sharpened, her late arrivals turned into disappearing acts during lunch rushes. The coffee shop's morning chorus began to carry a new undercurrent, the strained laugh, the silent elbow of a regular when Mara misreported an order. I could feel the trust I'd worked for fraying, and the thought of losing that small, local family tightened something in my chest. I did not want to become small in response. I wanted to meet this with clarity, and with a plan that would keep my hands clean and my conscience clear. I tried direct fixes at first. I started documenting incidents, putting a camera in the back room where the tip jar was kept, and had private conversations asking her to explain. Every attempt felt polite and reasonable, but she stonewalled me. When I showed her the camera footage of her taking cash and denying it, she lied and cried, then blamed me for not supporting her through a hard month. I wrote to the review site to request a takedown, and I alerted the health inspector to the truth, but the damage had started to accumulate in my chest like a cold. I was terrified of giving up my business to stress. I tightened my hours, I cut back on my own sleep, and I started answering every complaint immediately, which only made Mara escalate. One morning I arrived to find the back door propped open and several pounds of our best beans missing. I felt furious and desperate. I reported the stolen beans to the police, but the officer told me without proof it would be hard to make a case. The tip jar footage helped, but Mara denied everything. She had charm on her side, she was good at telling customers she was overwhelmed and that I was unreasonable. A quiet war began where every misstep by the shop was given a malicious explanation by her. It became clear that my polite, evidence-based approach was not stopping the cascade. The stress seeped into my nights. I woke up thinking of the shop and imagined losing the space where my art shows and weekly book club met. I began to doubt my judgment and wondered if I had been a bad boss for being too kind. Then Mara tried to get the landlord to push me out by lying that I had violated a safety code. The landlord came by, calm at first, then stern as Mara spun a story about blocked exits and unsanitary storage. That call left me shaking. For a few days I thought I might be ruined. The landlord said they would inspect formally, and if the inspector found anything, it could mean big fines or even a temporary closure. I felt like I had been dragged to my lowest point, certain that all my work could be undone by one employee who seemed to enjoy pulling the rug out from under me. I thought of walking away and starting over somewhere else because the fear of losing everything made me want to hide. I also thought of the rules I promised myself about revenge. It must be something I would not be ashamed to tell my friends and family, it must be proportional to the harm, and it should have a dose of humor so it did not eat me alive. I could not break those rules now, even when everything felt personal. To steady myself, I started doing small practical things that felt like armor. I reprinted inventory sheets and cross-checked deliveries against credit card slips. I tracked shift times and asked a couple of long-term regulars to jot a quick note when they witnessed odd behavior. I bookmarked time-stamped emails and made a private folder on my laptop labeled Clear Evidence in case I needed to hand something over quickly. Each added document felt like a small reassurance that I was not losing my grip. Still, the emotional part was harder. I replayed conversations in which I had been kind to Mara and wondered when kindness had become leverage for her. I remembered hiring her because she had a way with nervous college kids and could remember everyone's usual. It felt personal to be betrayed by someone who had learned our rhythms. At night, I sat in the dark of my apartment with a cup of reheated coffee, reciting the rules of the revenge I had set for myself like a litany. I refused to let anger make me reckless. I would not call her out publicly without proof. I would not do anything that could ruin her beyond the consequences of her actions, and I would find a way to make the truth visible without resorting to cruelty. That final bit of humor, so the story didn't digest me, became a lifeline. Imagining a small, witty twist that left everyone shaking their heads instead of crying helped me sleep more than logic did. I decided to craft a final plan that fit those rules. I would not humiliate Mara in a way that would ruin her life, and I would not break the law. I wanted a poetic end that put the spotlight on truth and exposed her manipulation without becoming cruel. I spent a week rebuilding a paper trail, saving receipts and timestamp photos, and asking a couple of customers whom Mara had accused of things to write short, truthful notes about what actually happened. I put everything in a neat folder, then I set a small, clever trap that leaned on the one thing Mara loved: attention. Mara had been flirting with starting a personal blog where she wrote about entrepreneurship and gave advice to young baristas. She loved feedback and followers. I set up a public post on the shop page titled "A Note of Thanks to Our Team" and scheduled it for the day before the landlord inspection. The post read like a neighborhood newsletter, warm, witty, and specific enough to feel intimate. I drafted short, affectionate blurbs for each staff member: Tom, who always covered the early shift; Layla, who made latte art that looked like birds; and even the delivery driver, who always left the boxes in a neat line. For Mara, I wrote a line that sounded like praise but carried the exact truth in a breezy tone. Yes, Mara, the one who once thought pocketing a few dollars from the tip jar was a quick way to cover the rent, we have all learned things together. I took care to make the sentence casual, no accusations, no capital letters, just a fact stated among many. That particular phrasing was deliberate. It reads like an in-joke to regulars who knew the rhythm of the place but would be undeniable to anyone paying attention. I printed copies of the receipts, the timestamp photos of the sealed bean container, the tip jar footage saved on a secured drive, and the notes from customers who had witnessed her lies. I labeled each document and tucked them in the folder in chronological order so the narrative would be obvious without commentary. Then I rehearsed how I would behave: calm, hospitable, and annoyingly ordinary. The plan depended on diffusing drama with steadiness. If Mara expected me to shriek, to beg, or to accuse publicly, she would have prepared her own theatricality. Instead, I wanted the opposite: an unflappable host who handed over facts and let others draw conclusions. The day before the landlord's visit, I uploaded the post, checked the privacy settings, and set my phone to vibrate in case anyone commented. I arranged pastries on a tray, labeled the coffee urns, and organized the back room to look business as usual. Then I sat at the counter with my folder and breathed. The contrast was the point: a tidy shop, a tidy folder, and a simple public note that would make it awkward for Mara to keep spinning lies without sounding petty. I told myself it wasn't about theatrical revenge, it was about reclaiming the narrative and protecting the people who relied on the shop. When a neighbor popped her head in to ask about the post, I smiled and said, "Just a little gratitude, people like to be seen." Inside, my heart thudded with a mix of dread and a strange lightness. For the first time in months, I felt like I had done everything I reasonably could to make sure truth had a louder voice than drama. And scheduled it for the day before the landlord inspection. The post was an affectionate but pointed note that read like a gratitude list to our team, naming each staff member and a small anecdote about them. For Mara, I wrote a line that sounded like praise but contained the exact truth in a breezy tone. Yes, Mara, the one who once thought pocketing a few dollars from the tip jar was a quick way to cover the rent. We have all learned things together. The post did not accuse, it simply told a tiny, undeniable story in a community voice. I also printed copies of the receipts, the timestamp photos of the sealed bean container, the tip jar footage saved on a secured drive, and the notes from customers who had witnessed her lies. On the morning the landlord inspection was scheduled, I posted the gratitude note to the shop page and then calmly, I invited the landlord and the inspector to join me at the shop for a coffee and a walkthrough. I did not call the police first because I wanted the story to be handled in a way that showed I knew how to run things responsibly. I would not allow the narrative to be that my shop was the problem. I thought about the cadence of the reveal like a barista thinking through a complicated pour, too fast and it spills, too slow and the crema breaks. The gratitude post was the crema, warm, familiar, and innocuous on the surface, but it would leave a mark you couldn't quite wash away. I rehearsed what I would say, practicing a neutral tone in my head as if explaining a special to a regular, so nothing in my face betrayed the weeks of late nights sorting receipts, rewatching footage, and rewriting drafts until the line about Mara read exactly like a compliment with teeth. I also prepped small practical things, a neat folder labeled inventory/notes, a flash drive with the video clearly named and time-stamped, and printed copies of customer statements folded into the pocket of my apron. I set the shop to its usual playlist and arranged pastries on the tray as if nothing were wrong. People should feel comforted by routine. I wanted the truth to arrive in a frame they recognized. When the landlord confirmed he'd be there mid-morning, I texted one of my regulars, an elderly man who'd seen Mara take cash once, and asked him to pop by for a coffee and to be willing to speak if needed. He agreed without fuss. Waiting for them, I reread the gratitude post on my phone and let myself smile. It was petty in a good way, precise, proportionate. It named a fault in plain language inside a sentence of thanks so that anyone reading who knew Mara would see the incongruity and the truth without me having to parade shame. I did not want to ruin her life. I wanted the facts to be visible and to let the people whose opinions mattered make the judgment. The gratification would be quiet and civic, not theatrical. When the inspector confirmed he was on his way, I took a deep breath, straightened my apron, and turned the sign in the window from open to welcome. The shop smelled like cinnamon and steamed milk, small things I thought anchor credibility. I was nervous, yes, but I felt prepared in a way I hadn't in weeks. This was not about vengeance for its own sake, it was about closing a loop with dignity. When the doorbell rang, I walked forward with a tray, offering a croissant and a smile, ready to let patience and paperwork do the rest. When they arrived, I greeted them as I always do. The landlord and inspector were professional and a little stiff, but I watched Mara from the counter and she was confused. She had expected me to be frantic or to beg. Instead, I offered pastries, I smiled, and I led them through the inventory. I'd spent the morning arranging the shelves so everything looked ordinary. Clean bags lined up, the sugar jars labeled, the new lockbox tucked out of sight, small theatrical touches that made the facts speak louder. At a planned moment, I invited the inspector to look at the tip jar footage on my secured drive. He was skeptical until he saw clear timestamp video of Mara taking money, replacing bills with a napkin, and then denying it to a regular. The loop showed the hesitation in her hands, the furtive angle of her shoulders. It was mundane, but it was damning. The landlord took notes when I handed over the folder of receipts and customer statements that documented the stolen beans and the false complaints. I had laminated a copy of the delivery timestamps and circled the discrepancy with a careful red pen. When the inspector asked Mara about the anonymous online review, I simply opened my laptop and showed the draft of the gratitude post that had gone up that morning. The post itself did not use accusatory language, but the way it named and humanized the team made it impossible for her to maintain her fabricated narrative without sounding petty. I watched her face when the line about practicing honesty like pulling espresso came up. The smile fell. She stammered and then lost control. She tried to spin the story into something about me being controlling, about my management style, but her voice lacked the calm manipulation it needed now that I had prepared facts and witnesses. The inspector and landlord listened, and then the inspector politely said he would note the violations Mara had tried to attribute to the shop as unsubstantiated and would instead schedule a follow-up to look into personnel and theft. The landlord told Mara she would be put on a week-long unpaid suspension from working in the shop until things were resolved by the inspector, and the landlord suggested a mediation session. I kept my face open, not gloating. I told them all I wanted was a safe, honest place for customers and staff and that I hoped we could move forward. Mara left in a flurry of dramatic words, shoulders thrown, voice pitched for sympathy. Later that day, she texted the group chat with a message full of pity-seeking accusations and threats to report me. I did not reply. I had what I needed: the truth in writing, witnesses who would back me up, and a public post that had made it harder for her to continue her campaign of lies without looking ridiculous. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe without the ache behind my ribs. I went behind the counter, ran my fingers along the cool espresso machine, and felt the ordinary hum of things reclaim the space. I brewed a single perfect cup, and silly as it felt, I took a sip like a small private toast to prudence and paperwork. After the dust settled, there was a quiet satisfaction that felt steadier than victory. Mara was suspended for 1 week, and the fear of immediate closure faded because the inspector had seen the clear evidence and the landlord's trust in me deepened. The follow-up inspection cleared the shop of the invented violations, and the landlord agreed to enforce better security measures and to replace the tip jar with a lockbox. Mara eventually resigned rather than face mediation, and she moved out of town within months. I told this story to my trusted friends the way I had promised myself I would, straightforward, with a small laugh at the end about how I used a gratitude post as a quiet mirror. I felt no shame because my actions were proportional and rooted in facts. I had not humiliated her in a way that would ruin her life. I had protected my business and my team. The shop regained a calmer rhythm, and regulars told me they felt relieved. I learned a lesson about boundaries, documentation, and the importance of building a community that notices the little things. My revenge had been sweet, but it had also been honest and tidy, like a well-steamed milk cap on a latte. I slept with the lights on the first night after the inspection and woke up the next morning with a lightness that felt unfamiliar and unburdening. In the days that followed, I cataloged changes: a new lock on the tip jar, a logbook by the register where staff initialed cash counts, and a rotunda of supportive notes from customers taped to the back room door. One regular, Mrs. Delgado, who brought crossword puzzles every Tuesday, slid me a paper that read in looping handwriting, "We see you, we've got your back." That small gesture meant more than any official statement. I also started a ritual I hadn't expected. Each week I invited one team member to a quick debrief over the quiet hour before the morning rush, not to interrogate but to listen and to rebuild trust. We talked about schedules, about lines that hadn't been crossed, about ways to cover shifts without secrets. It felt cathartic and practical all at once. Sometimes at night I would reread the gratitude post, marveling at how a few well-chosen words had flipped the script. I kept copies of the receipts and the footage in a locked file, and I made a checklist for future incidents: what to document, who to call, how to keep the community informed without weaponizing gossip. The whole affair taught me that dignity could be a tool as powerful as any legal letter. I did not gloat when Mara's name disappeared from our calendar and our team chat. Instead, I ordered one extra cinnamon roll each Sunday and shared it with the staff as a small celebration of continuity. On slow afternoons, when sunlight slanted across the counter, a customer would sometimes ask, in that conspiratorial tone people reserve for gossip, how I'd pulled it off. I would smile and say, "Facts, faces, and a little public poetry." It was true. The poetry was the gratitude post, a precise public kindness that forced truth into the open. I knew I had been careful to keep my promise to myself: no cruelty, no lies, just a clever exposure of patterns she could not deny. It was a tidy end, but not a finality. It was more like closing a chapter in a notebook and starting the next page with cleaner ink. Now, months later, the shop hums like it used to. We have a small plaque by the counter with a line that reads, "This place is built on truth and good coffee," and sometimes customers ask about it. I tell the short version with a smile and a sip, and people laugh when I say that sometimes the best defense is a good spreadsheet and a public thank you. I also learned to trust my instincts sooner and to act when small things add up. Revenge had been tempting as anger, but I turned it into an organized correction: legal, proportional, and yes, gently funny. When I walk past the table where Mara used to sit, I remember how hollow it felt to think my life could be upended by someone else's petty choices, and I feel gratitude for the people who stood with me. That is the new normal: a shop that has weathered a storm and come out steadier, and a me who knows how to protect what I love without losing myself in cruelty. There are quieter additions to the routine that remind me daily how much I changed. I keep the lockbox behind the register and show new hires the folder of receipts and notes, more as a lesson than a threat. Sometimes I point to the plaque and say, "We build on truth," and people nod like it's a small creed. I've started a short monthly note we hand to regulars: a line about a staff win, a thank you, and once in a while a small wry anecdote about honesty. Nothing mean, just a wink to the community that watched us steady the sales. A few customers who were nervous during the worst weeks now bring flowers or pastries, and one woman who attends the book club insists on reading a short passage about resilience whenever we have meetings. I keep those gestures on the counter next to the tip jar turned lockbox. They are reminders that kindness returned is its own kind of triumph. Sometimes at night I wipe down the counter and find myself replaying the months of fear, the landlord's stern look, the inspector's polite disbelief before seeing the footage. I remember how my hands shook the day I posted the gratitude note and how oddly satisfying it felt when the words did what evidence could not. Let the community see a version of the truth that was both firm and human. I don't pretend the stress vanished overnight. There were sleepless stretches and a stubborn soreness in my chest that took evenings and long runs to loosen. But the hurt hardened into something useful, a sharper sense of boundaries and a calmness about confrontation. I learned to build small, secure systems, time-stamped photos, backup drives, clear job descriptions that made it harder for petty sabotage to take root. And there are private, softer victories. The way Mara's favorite seat stays empty now, the resilience in the barista's stride, my landlord's more relaxed check-ins. I run staff meetings where we talk about fairness and expectations, and the new team members know honesty is part of the job as much as pulling a proper shot. I still laugh when I tell friends that my revenge involved a spreadsheet and a blog post, but the laugh is mixed with gratitude. The story gets told often because it's a tidy reminder of rules that saved me: proportionality, legality, and keeping a touch of humor so the fight doesn't harden into bitterness. At closing, I switch off the espresso machine, lock the door, and sometimes sit for a moment at the table where book club meets. The city hums outside and the shop smells like citrus and dark roast. I think about how fragile success can feel and how sturdy it becomes when defended with care instead of spite. That is the version of victory I wanted, not to crush someone who had wronged me, but to restore dignity to my small community and to myself. It feels like the right kind of peace, quiet, practical, and thoroughly caffeinated.